Well, I'm Shirley Tyler. I come from Massachusetts, grew up in Salem, Massachusetts. Went to college at Simmons College in Boston, Massachusetts. And all of that was very exciting and interesting. This was during the Depression, so things were very hard for everybody. And my mother was a widow. And at first, I didn't even think I'd get to college. And then when I finished, I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I don't know who it was, said, "Oh, I know some places in Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, et cetera, et cetera." I didn't figure out for years after that my aunt was still, her picture was somewhere, because she traveled all over the South, and she had contacts because she went to the national conventions all over. And she had passed on my name. I wouldn't have come if I'd known that Ella had been involved, because I wanted to be my own person. And I guess I was following somewhat in my Aunt Ella's footsteps, because she was an educator back when the South was segregated, and she used to go all over the South helping give them advice about what to do to desegregate their schools. I did not know the day I came to Alexandria that Alexandria was just desegregating its schools. And that was a shock, because this was the Middle West to me. This was not the South. And so it was a learning experience for me to see that a lot of things were hidden from most of us in the East. We didn't hear a lot about that. We didn't have the coverage, I guess, nationwide that we have now. And so it was quite an experience. I came and I met people, young people who had been brought into this area from different parts of the country where the schools are very good, to help bring the schools here in Northern Virginia up to what the schools had been in the North. And they had started first by hiring superintendents in Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax, who came from New York and the states in New England. That was my first experience of teaching. And I couldn't have done that in the public schools because I wasn't certified to teach. But by the time I taught at Grace Episcopal and I had a good reputation, I didn't have any problems wherever I went getting a job, because I was generally recommended, or the superintendents in Alexandria and Arlington were looking for people from the New England states and New York to bring into Virginia. And they had come from the East, and they were determined that when the schools opened up, we were going to bring them up to the East Coast states. It was a shock to me that at that time I didn't know the Northwest was segregated. And I'd been listening to my Aunt Ella talk about the South, and this was a shock to me. And I came. It's the first day that they started with the desegregating of the schools. I just made up my mind. We're going to make these schools good. And the superintendents in Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax came from New England, as I remember. And they were bringing in people like me who had good backgrounds and good college recommendations and so forth, and bringing us in to help our colleagues learn how to teach. I said, well, I took pre-social work. I didn't take education. But they said, we know where you went to school. You had an excellent school setting. So you know what you're doing. But it was a good school board. Most of the people that were brought in were from the north. It had good. The men were mainly leaders, the superintendents and the principals, and they had excellent educations. And they helped, determine who was going to come in and what the places were that people tried to teach them what we knew, how we lived in the East, because it's all altogether different from what they were used to doing. The students had been used to going to segregated schools. I guess I was appalled at it's like people were afraid to go down to, was it city, county, whatever it is, hall, and say, we need this, that, and the other, and you need to support us. This is your city. And if we don't all work together to keep the community going, we're going to go downhill. And the superintendents of schools, John Albom and Mr. Rutter, and I've forgotten the other person, they joined in the chorus and helped the parents understand that if they wanted the schools to be good, they had to get out there and make the neighborhoods good. They had to get the politicians involved, and the politicians needed to know they weren't kings and queens, getting a job that they grew into and the kids grew into, that they had a responsibility for working with the community and not being on their high horses, because some of them initially weren't carrying the load. And the women led what was going on and got people riled up and angry. And the men, at that time, a lot of them, it had to do with the South and what they'd gone through when they hadn't been allowed to grow and develop, and they didn't know what to do. And so it was sort of, we were teaching the women, and the women were teaching the men how to get their guts and go, get on. The neighborhood isn't doing well. You have to learn to get down to city council or county council and talk to them and fuss at them. Go to the school board, tell them what's going right and what's going wrong. And the superintendents had all come from the north. Mr. Rutter, Don Elbaum, and I've forgotten the names of the other, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax. Those three jurisdictions used to work together, compare notes. Arlington was got to be more progressive than Alexander, dragged his feet a little, and Fairfax a little more. But I think a lot of the professors, more of the professors from the university, had their children in the Arlington schools and had them in Alexandria and Fairfax initially. And because they, would assess things, was my child going to get the best education? And you had more flexibility about getting your kids placed where you wanted them placed if you knew the right people. People talked about Alexandria and this part of the world as though it were the Deep South, because they'd had segregated schools and so forth. And what I learned was, no, they were different. That people had come from Europe and many of them highly intelligent and professors. There were professors and from the university and so forth. And so we had a whole different perspective that you could get people to be exposed to. And they started having classes in the university and in the cities and counties. Right after the war, you had a lot of military, and they got jobs in schools, and they also knew. See, they never gotten all these skills in the military that they wouldn't have had, and they brought those skills into the community. And so, as the community learned skills and the schools learned skills, this whole part of the country that I thought was advanced when I came was supposed to be advanced and wasn't. Came into the 20th century. I didn't know that the schools had been desegregated until a week before I came to this end of the country. It was a whole different experience. Is it my parents, pastors? I grew up in Massachusetts, and that probably is part of the key, because I found out that we probably were more advanced in many, many ways in Massachusetts than they were even in New York State. We were less snobbish, more outgoing. We had people coming into Massachusetts from every section of the world, the ships and everything, and having a lot of coastline from Maine all the way down to Connecticut helped, because people would come in. Sometimes they'd come in illegally, sometimes they'd come in legally, and they'd come in and you had MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Harvard, and Simmons, where I went to college, and places in New England where we were taught to get training in some profession, but also to reach out to the community and share the gifts that you've learned on your job that other people can use, and share what you have with the rest of the community. And the community is Massachusetts. It's your state. It's your country. It's the world. I don't think I'm a religious fanatic, but I guess somewhere along the line, God was involved in leading me where I went, because my mother was a widow. It was Depression time when I went to college, no money. And yet I got to Wisconsin, and then I got to Minnesota, and down to Texas. So all of a sudden I was going different places around the country. I didn't travel overseas, but people were coming from all the countries overseas. And so, if my mother had money, I would have gone. But I was exposed to those people, and they were writing home and everything. So I said, in a way, I have a link. And the church, I'm Episcopalian, the Episcopal Church is a blessing to me, because they were doing a lot of things. Between what my mother did, my father had died before my youngest brother was born. Between what my mother did, the community did, the church did. I had an Aunt Ella who worked in the South, and when it was still segregated, and she was doing things, and she'd come and share what she was doing, and she'd bring me books and everything. And I was learning from what she was doing. And I guess because of, we had an organization developed after the war called the National Student Association. And I got involved in that. And again, I think it's just the good Lord. And I learned from the military men and women the things that they were doing at home and abroad and the skills that they needed. And I could pass some of that information on because they were doing, the men were in all kinds of industries within the military. And you could say, you want to be an engineer, blah, blah, blah. You want to do this, you want to be a nurse, you want to teach. Look and see what the military has to offer. It's something to start you out. And someone said, military. I said, you'd be surprised. The military is not what you've been reading about in some of the books and hearing about. The military has changed, and they're stretching out, and they have social conscience. And they're doing a lot of positive things for people in this country. And that was a whole different perspective for some people. The military to them was just sailors and so forth, getting ready to go to war. I said, we can't have war all the time in terms of going to countries and destroying countries. We have war and poverty, and that's what they first called it. I think the war and poverty started, and I thought it was a great title because poverty isn't the kind of problem in today's world. It's not that some people don't have a lot or anything, but poverty is not what it was before and during World War II and before World War II. My mother was a widow. I knew what poverty was. And I guess a more positive country. I hope, and I hope that that's continuing. And the challenge to America, I've always said, is to go back and reread and rethink. And for people my age, I hope we're still talking about those years when people were so deprived. No. If you get Americans involved in something and they can see that it's going to improve their community and their way of life and be helpful for their children and the elders and so forth, you can get it done. But you have to remember, we don't live on little islands. We're a big nation. We have a lot of responsibility, but we still have a lot of resources. The good Lord, because I wasn't physically well, so I just had to, just take life as it comes. And my mother was a widow, and my grandmothers were widows, and they were all very intelligent people. My grandmothers didn't have didn't have any college education, and my mother had to drop out after her first year to get her one sister through college, who became a leader in the South, in the Southern schools and colleges. And my other aunt was in nursing when they were doing some pioneer things in New York, and then she went on and carried it other places. And I guess growing up in New England, because you had all this creative energy there that had been going on for generations, and people getting out and doing, creating, inventing, giving, traveling, etc. And then having a family that's so supportive. They've grown up in their way to be leaders too. Well, I speak up when things don't seem to be going right. Um, and we talk, some of us will just talk informally and sometimes loud enough for other people to hear. Because there are some people they were totally isolated. In my generation, I don't know where they were living. They weren't living where my Aunt Ella was working in the Deep South. Yeah. Americans should never give that up, because there's always going to be an Adolf Hitler or somebody popping up and trying to figure out how to take over the world. And maybe it's just a little world within the community, or maybe it's the world like Adolf Hitler. But if, there's some people who want to get into city government and they just want to run city government their way. And city government is for all the people. And you have to teach people the people who understand democracy have to continue to teach it and preach it and live it, or else it'll fade away. Nothing lasts forever if you don't take care of it. Well, the professors in the colleges and universities and the teachers in the high schools need to let these young people know you don't get nothing. Some of the people in my neighborhood would say, you don't get nothing for nothing. And we have to protect everything. This is a great country. Did 4-mile run flood? Yes, 4-mile run flooded, and it was awful. Oh, I don't know. I think I've repressed a lot of it because a good part of the city used to flood, and we'd be out of school with no educated ones to do while everything was getting together. They were difficult times. I'd like them to, when they have children of their own, be involved in their community in some kind of way, and make sure that the politicians are not being politicians, but are interested in the community and building the community and helping people move forward, not backward. And tell them that, after all, the United States is the leading country in this world, and we have a responsibility to keep that moving and not to be snobbish about it, because I think that's also important. Just don't think because you're Americans you're better than anybody else. Just remember that we have better opportunities than even now than a lot of places in the world. And that this is a great country. They need to preserve it. And we need to preserve our leadership, but never be snobbish about it. Because I have a theory, you get too high on your horses, God's going to come down and teach you a good lesson. And I think he does in little ways even now. And I'm not a religious fanatic by any manner of means, but I do believe that God is powerful and watches over us and takes us where we go, guides us, helps open the doors. We can all be pioneers, leaders for change, if that change needs to be made. And there's a whole lot goes into all of that. There are always, I hope, going to be new creations and so forth. Figure out what's good for the country and the world, and figure out what isn't good, and go down the right paths to continue to, one, I'm very patriotic, keep the United States in the forefront, because we have people from all over the world, and we've learned to be tolerant, more tolerant than people are still in a lot of parts of the world, in my judgment. And just keep learning and creating, inventing, mining, teaching, everything, and keep this country in the forefront of leadership.